All right, good morning. So let's see, there's no changes other than what I announced on Friday. So today we'll be talking about sequences, and then next time about repair and other sequences. And then Friday we'll spend time discussing this chapter by Barbara Fox et al. On repair, self-repair in English and Japanese. So are there questions that you have about things like on the syllabus or other kinds of things that you want to talk about?
I have a question. Other than our analysis paper one, are there other long-term projects that we should be working on right now? Okay.
Before that, there is a midterm exam next week. That's a good reminder.
Hmm.
A week from Wednesday. So we'll do an in-class midterm exam. That'll be similar to kinds of the analysis work that we've done together and in small groups. Other than that, just the paper. Okay, then let's get right into it. Well, this is a notification from the dean if anybody's interested in being on a student advisory council for the dean. They're looking for volunteers, and there's a link here. And this is all on D2L. If you don't get this now, you can look at D2L if you're interested. It's a new thing. Could be interesting. The dean, Todd Rosensteel, is a very energetic guy who's been at PSU for, I guess, as long as I've been here, and he's really interested in research. He's interested in the connection between research and education, and he's particularly interested in getting undergraduates interested in research. So he's looking for feedback from students about that and other issues. So think about it if you're interested. Now, so last time we talked about units and what the focus of an analysis might be, your starting point for analysis. So in conversation analysis, we think about terms rather than sentences because people don't speak in sentences. Sometimes a turn, it coincides with something like a clause, so that happens. And there are different kinds of units that make up a turn. Sometimes a turn, you can define it in multiple units, and sometimes if you use grammatical terminology, like here's a clause and then there's another clause right after it without any break in intonation or anything, that's a way to think about talking about how turns are constructed. Because we're looking at actions that happen, social actions that arise out of people's language and meaning making. So when we isolate particular kinds of actions, then we want to ask, well, how is this action being done in a turn, and how is this turn formulated? Because you can produce a turn in an infinite variety of ways to accomplish particular actions. So that's why turn construction, how the turn is formulated, is an important aspect of doing an analysis. So these turns, so speakers produce a turn with the awareness that there are recipients, there are people that they're producing the turns for. So produce turns in a way that the end of the turn is projectable. So the speaker and the recipients are both attuning to this projectability. So the speaker produces a turn so that the end of it is projectable, and the recipients, they're also listening for when this thing is going to be ending. So that's how we do this very precise turn taking that we do. So you've probably already noticed this in your transcripts, that the, the, the turn taking happens pretty seamlessly. Now, if you're doing a Zoom or other online interaction, that might not be the case. And that's not something that's been really analyzed yet. So we're taking, all of these things that I'm talking about here, the baseline is it's face-to-face interaction or telephone interaction. So in telephone interaction too, there's very little delay. So it's a different kind of interaction than so far at least what I've experienced with something like Zoom or Skype even. So yeah, so people project the ends of their turns, and you do this through these cues: syntactic cues, action cues, and sound production cues. And last time we talked about a little bit about syntactic cues. So it's just like if somebody produces a clause, that's a complete clause. It's a strong piece of evidence that they may be done. They may be done. Depends on the type of clause. But if they produce a syntactically complete unit, and then it aligns with a sound production that sounds like it's complete, and then there's a kind of action, a pragmatic action, like let's say a question. If all of those things align together, that strongly projects the end of a speaker's turn. And we all orient to this, we all hear this, we all are doing this kind of projection work all the time. And then if you have video data, there's gaze and gesture also play a role in how turns get constructed too. It makes it even more complex. So that's the interactive aspect of all this. So remember, we started with speech acts and Grice's maxims and things like that, and analyzing individual utterances or individual whatever they were, sometimes made up examples, and we tried to talk about what kinds of actions are going on there. And we can still we still want to focus on action as we go forward with our analyses, but the action, we're now looking at how is it packaged in a particular syntactic way, in a particular sound way. What's the sound production of it? And then how do recipients, how do they hear and see that projection? And how are they orienting to particular action? So now it's multiple people doing this work together. So last time I showed this example of the auto racing where there was a clause, and at the end there was creaky voice, and then the pitch contour went down, and that shows that at that point it's relevant for a next speaker to talk, and that's what this transition relevance place is. So some people also talk about this as a transition relevance space, because it's not always it doesn't have to be, you don't have to start taking a turn at a precise place, otherwise it's not going to happen. There's a little kind of a area at which people jump in and start talking when it's clear it's relevant for a next speaker to talk. So this will be especially important if you're analyzing your interaction and you're hearing things overlapping talk and you want to call it interruption. So just beware of that. So there's a difference between overlapping talk and interruption. So not all overlapping talk is interruption. So interruption would be something that occurs when somebody starts talking and it's not a transition relevance place. So if somebody's producing a turn and it's not projectable to be ending at that point and somebody else starts talking, then you can make a case that that's interruptive. Okay, so that's about turn construction and transition relevance places. So yeah, we talked about syntax and sound production last time, or gave one illustration of that. The one thing I didn't talk about was action, and action is sometimes just called pragmatic completion. So here, you know, the mother says, "What are you doing?" Sean says, "Nothing, just sitting around at work." "Oh, are you?" "Yep." And then mom says, "Busy?" So it's hard to talk about this in terms of syntax. It's a single word surrounded by an in breath and an out breath. Busy, but you can see there's a certain action here. It's acting as like a kind of some kind of I don't know what I call it, care, information seeking, doing it's not interrogation, that's a little bit too strong, but just inquiry about the sun. So that's the action here, and it's in one word. So that's it. So if you have a syntactic completion point, an intonation completion point, and an action completion point, like they all align, that strongly projects the next turn. So here you have something like a pragmatic move, somebody you could say asking, "Are you busy?" shorthand, with a high rising intonation that strongly projects a next speaker. And that is what happens. Busy? No, not really. So do you have questions about that, about this idea of the transition relevance place? So that's, how is it that we know that a turn is complete? It's when a next speaker takes a turn. And the next speaker is going to take a turn, usually at around a transition relevance place. That's where you expect to see speaker change.
So the transition relevance place is like at the end of a clause, or when you can hear that they're starting to finish their sentence?
Yeah, it could be, but somebody can finish a clause but hold on to the turn because of something they do with the prosody. So I might end a clause, but it doesn't sound like it's ending because whatever, I'm doing a sound stretch, or I'm going up at the end, or not quite a high rise. So it's when all of these things align together. So these are different cues: a syntactic cue, an action cue, a sound production cue. If those things all align at the same place, then it strongly projects that somebody else should take a turn at that point.
So what happens then if the listener thinks that all of them have lined up and starts talking, but that actually interrupts what the other person is saying?
Well, I would say they wouldn't interrupt that person, because if those things all happen, it's relevant for the next person to take a turn. So if they start talking, as an analyst, you can point that out and say, well, somebody produced a turn, and at this point, it's syntactically complete, the sound production is complete, and it did a particular pragmatic action. So it's relevant for somebody else to start talking then. And if the first person who produced that continues talking, then the participants have to deal with potential overlap, and they deal with it in particular ways. Okay. Okay, so here's an example. I sent this on email, but I'll send it on the chat. This is an example. I have examples here. I think this one was on last week's also. So this was the chicken dinner one, and
I can't go for spend math.
Did you
That
get
sounds hard as
through
a
your
rock.
potatoes?
Yeah,
It
but
is?
this thing is hard.
It's not done, the potato?
I don't think so.
Seems done to me. How about you, Michael?
Brian, who cooked this meal?
A little bit of it isn't done.
That's right.
okay, so when we get down to line 14, we want to describe the turn construction. We said last time there's two clauses here. Seems done to me. How about you, Michael? So what's important about that turn construction is that there are two units. The first unit deals with the previous action. It seems done to me. And then the next clause, how about you, Michael, is the first action directive to Michael. And Michael is particularly named. So this strongly allocates a next turn to Michael. Michael eventually does take the next turn. And then we want to talk about his turn construction, and we can talk about that there's hesitation here or disfluency. I mean, he produces a full clause, a little bit of it isn't done. It ends in a final falling intonation. So there's a clause, a final falling intonation, and then Shane takes the next turn. So the way that you transcribe something, like especially this, like we want to indicate somehow that the sound that Michael is producing here is, I don't know, hesitant, or there's some kind of affect to this. And it's important to try to represent that in the transcript when you make an analytic case. Okay, the next one, 7 or 6, I don't remember which number this is, but this is an example of turn allocation and turn construction also working together. So these three people are at a dinner table, and mom says here, can we have the blessing, Wesley, would you ask the blessing, please? So what I have this example for is, here, I'll play it so you can hear it. It's kind of quiet.
We have the blessing, but Wesley, would you ask the blessing, please?
Heavenly Father, give us thankful hearts, these and all blessings.
Amen. Okay.
So what I think is interesting here and important to talk about with respect to turn construction and turn allocation is here, the mom starts the turn, can we have the blessing? And then there's this disfluency, and then names a particular person. So nominates a person, Wesley, to ask the blessing. So there's a kind of, what we want to do here is, rather than treating this as some kind of defective talk or error, what seems to be going on is there's a restart of the turn, which nominates a particular person. So rather than just general, can we have the blessing, it becomes, Wesley, would you ask the blessing? And this kind of thing happens when before people reformulate something. Maybe there was, maybe the intention was to get Wesley's gaze, but Wesley wasn't gazing at the mother, so the mother restarts the turn. So this is why what I'm talking about here is you as an analyst talking about how a turn is constructed, because it's relevant to the kind of action that's being done. So when somebody does something like this, a question for the analyst is, why does somebody produce a turn like this? And it's easy enough to say, oh, they screwed up or they had some psycholinguistic problem, but that doesn't tell us about the interactional aspect of this. And the interactional aspect of it is there's a start of a turn, disfluency, then there's a restart of the turn, naming a particular individual. And then, at the end, we'd see, yeah, okay, Wesley hears this as the turn being allocated to him. Well, he was named, so he says, all right, and then he continues. This is another thing that's a little kind of more in the gray area here, but sometimes people will use particular lexical items that are either have a kind of affect, or they just by the particular lexical item, more talk is projected. And Charles Goodwin called these things prospective indexicals. So we don't really think of the word problem as an indexical word like deictic words like this or that or now or then. Those words are usually the ones that I talked about as indexical because they point to particular things. But lexical items like this can do that too. So when somebody says, we definitely have a problem on the bridge, if somebody talks about a problem as a recipient, if more talk about the problem isn't forthcoming, you'd say like, well, what about the problem? You didn't say anything about the problem. I mean, that sounds like you should talk about that more. And these kinds of things too, these are assessments that kind of project more talk to come. So that's another way to think about when you're doing an analysis. If you hear something like this is you listening to your own data as a speaker, as a user of the language. And when somebody produces something like this, if you're a part of the interaction, you're expecting more talk to come. And that's why it's called a prospective indexical. It's like looking forward or pointing forward to something more. Okay, so this is, when you do your analysis, it's not that when we talk about turn construction, it's not that you should start at the very beginning and then start describing in detail all the turn construction and writing that down. It's that you look for particular actions in your data that stand out to you for whatever reason. And then you start thinking, okay, this particular action, how is it produced? Maybe the production of the turn itself was what was noticeable to you. Hesitation, restart. Did the turn end with a particular intonation contour? Were particular words or parts of words stressed? And that's what you look at when you look at turn construction. And that is something that can help give you an insight into the kind of action that's going on. So often I'll see in students' papers that they're describing something that's happening, and they're saying, well, this action happened, and then this person heard this turn as a particular way, so they responded to that turn in a particular way. But as the reader who's looking at the transcript, I'm not seeing that in the transcript. But the student, as the analyst, has the audio or audio-visual data available, and they can, they're right, their analysis is correct. But as a reader, I can't see that it's correct because I don't see it in the transcript. So then I'll ask the student, I said, well, what led you to believe that that particular action was happening? And they'll say, oh, because they really went up at the end, the intonation really went up. And I said, okay, well, you have to indicate that in the transcript. Then put a question mark at the end. And then the reader of the analysis can hear, in a way, what the analyst can hear. So that's why the details of the transcript can become very important to making your case. Okay, let's try this one together. So the question is, how does turn design give evidence for particular kinds of action that are going on? So these are two friends and it's a telephone call. And Emma says, want to come down, have a bite of lunch with me? Or, it doesn't sound like that. Have a bite of lunch with me? Okay, and then here, Nancy overlaps. Want to come down, have, and then Nancy says, it's just something, something. And then Emma continues, I got some beer and stuff. And then Nancy says, well, you're real sweet, hon. And then Emma says, or do you have something else? So in 18, want to come down and have a bite of lunch with me? What's that action?
Invitation.
Seems like an invitation to me too. Want to come down and have a bite of lunch with me? So we can say, we say, looks like an invitation. It's pretty complete grammatical clause, isn't it? Except there's not an operator do, want to come down and have a bite of lunch with me? So it's like a clause with final high rising intonation. Clearly sounds like an intonation. Or clearly sounds like an invitation. In fact, it's even latched here. Want to come down and have a bite of lunch with me? I got some beer and stuff. It kind of is like a 2-unit turn even. Okay, so then what's Nancy doing in line 19?
It seems like she's pre-rejecting the invitation.
It could, so this is a possible, beginning of a rejection of the invitation or declining the invitation. It's just, so the word just is a word that it often happens in dispreferred responses. So, but why does it happen there? I mean, the invitation hasn't been offered yet, has it?
Well, I think you can tell that it's going to be an invitation just from the beginning before Nan overlaps.
Yeah, and I agree. And why would somebody produce it here rather than line 21?
It's like she's anticipating the pre-sequence and she just wants to cut him off before he asks the question.
Yeah, or maybe they don't want them to think, oh, whatever they're asking isn't good enough. Whatever they're asking them to do is something that they just don't want to do. Maybe they're saying, oh, I just have something before they even extend the invitation so that they don't feel bad.
Yeah, there's something about, heading off the full invitation beforehand, and, some aspect of politeness comes into this, face saving maybe. So what you hear, so this shows projection. So Nancy is projecting this to be an invitation, and she starts the declining of the invitation already here. Okay, I got some beer and stuff. And then in 22, well, you're real sweet, hon. So far we don't have a rejection of the invitation yet. And then in 24, Emma says, or do you have something else? Something.
Well, you said once that not giving an answer can also mean something.
Yeah. So what can you say about line 24?
she's just rejecting it.
I
But
don't, line 24 is by Emma, and Emma is the person who gave the invitation. So what is Emma doing again in line 24 then?
I think she's asking for clarification because, I mean, a lot of things that happen is like if you don't give an answer, if you're like just well, someone's going to ask a clarifying question if you're not being specific. So she's like, or do you have something else?
Could be asking for clarification. I would characterize it a little bit differently. So think of yourself asking somebody, you want to go out for lunch? Well, no. Or do you have something else going on?
I think she's preserving Nan's negative face
By doing what?
by giving her an out.
Okay, so giving her an out. So this or, it's like a or choice question. Do you want to go to this restaurant or do you want to go to that restaurant? I mean, that's an or choice question. So that somebody has a choice here. So here, this starts with an invitation. It's upgraded. Have lunch. I've got some beer even, And then this is just, well, you're sweet. And Emma then gives the choice, an out. Or do you have something else going on? Or do you have something else? That's how I hear that. Do you have something else going on? So there's no rejection yet of the invitation, but we can say in line 24, Emma has analyzed this as an upcoming rejection. We don't even get to the explicit rejection, but Emma is analyzing it that way. And Emma at this point then says, or you've got something else going on. Maybe then it develops, we can make a plan another day or something like that. So this is how you see action happening via the turn construction and via different participants, how they're doing it together. So that Nancy doesn't have to even make an outright declination of the invitation. That Emma hears that as forthcoming, so then Emma, moves it off to, or or something else, So yeah, no immediate acceptance. And in a minute, later today, or maybe next time, we'll talk about preference. And this is where we see preference happening. Yeah. Okay.
So for that example, you wouldn't say that Nancy has declined the invitation because she has not explicitly said that?
Well, what do you want to say about that? Has she declined?
No.
You could call it like an incomplete decline.
You could call it an incomplete decline.
Yeah.
You could call it a pre-declining.
You could also maybe say it's like off record.
Off record, yeah. You can say for sure there's no explicit declining of the invitation. It's not, I decline your invitation. It's like not even a no thank you. We don't have that there, but it's clearly oriented to by the participants as an invitation and a declining, or she doesn't accept it. And then there's something like, giving somebody an out by suggesting they may have an account for it. Okay, so this leads then to a basic structure of conversation, adjacency pairs. And this is an important analytic construct in a way that you often will start with your analyses. And that's what we've just been doing up here. We've been analyzing an adjacency pair. An invitation should be followed by, what's the second part of an invitation adjacency pair? Invitation and
Response.
Response. And what kind of response?
Acceptance or deferring?
Yeah, so acceptance or deferring, and the accepted, acceptance is what we call the preferred second pair part. You want to go to a movie Saturday night? Oh, sure, that'd be great. Invitation, acceptance. But what we had here was not an acceptance. And there's a lot more work that gets done when you don't have the acceptance. It's just, well, you're real sweet. And then maybe eventually they get to no, thank you. Okay. So adjacency pairs, there's just pairs of terms that happen regularly in language culture that are hearable, and we recognize them as pairs: question, answer, invitation, accepting or declining, offer, accept or decline. I mean, these are just some of them. Assessment, agreement. It's really cold today. Huh? There's an assessment, and you respond with, let me try that again. It's really cold today.
Isn't it? Yeah, it is.
Yes, it is. Oh my goodness, it's so cold. Yeah. So this is assessment, and you agree with the assessment. Now, you don't have to agree with the assessment, but if it's a simple assessment and you're doing kind of simple small talk, that often happens. And if you disagree, you can disagree, that you usually do extra work if you do the dispreferred response. One that's not up here that we've already had examples of is, I can say, hey, Shayla.
Yes.
Yes. Okay, so a summons and a response. So if you say somebody's name, you call somebody, they respond to you. That's another adjacency pair. Oh, that's it right here, summons. John, what? Telephone ring? Hello? This is what Shegloff called as a summons response. These things that happen at the end of a conversation, a telephone conversation usually, these terminal exchanges, bye, the end. See, here's the positive assessment, positive assessment. Isn't that good? It's delicious. So here's just an example of an embedded, did you tell Mary we moved to the beach? That's the first pair part. Where's the answer to that? The answer to that is down in line 4, yes. So in between, you have another adjacency pair. Did you tell Mary we moved to the beach? Why? Is she here? Yes. Yes. First pair part, second pair part, first pair part, second pair part. So here's, kind of reduced forms of these invitations. So invitation, why don't you come up and see me sometime? I would like to. Invitation, acceptance. Invitation and refusal. If you'd care to come and visit a little while this morning, I'll give you a cup of coffee. Well, it's awfully sweet of you. I don't think I can make it this morning. I'm running an ad in the paper and I have to stay near the phone. So you see the difference between these two is this is the dispreferred response. So the preferred adjacency pair response is invitation, acceptance. And usually when that happens, it's much shorter. And for the dispreferred response, there's usually more linguistic and interactional work that's done for the dispreferred response. So I can say, oh, it's really cold today, isn't it? And you might say, well, you know, I'm from a cold weather climate, so it doesn't really bother me, but I guess it's cold, you know. So you're not just doing an outright quick agreement, you're doing more work there. So this is a tricky concept, this preference. And I want you to think of it, you can think of it as synonymous with markedness. So in some classes, you've probably talked about things that are marked and things that are unmarked linguistically. So the preferred response is the unmarked response. Or you could think of it maybe like statistically more likely to occur kind of response. You know, but it doesn't mean that whenever somebody invites you to something that you have to accept. You don't have to accept it. You're not, it's not required. It's just that the, you know, the norm is to accept, and if you can't accept, then you do extra work. So the normative response, the unmarked response, is associated with less linguistic and interactional work. The marked response, the non-normative response, is marked with more linguistic work. And this is one of these, you know, about the weather. God, isn't it dreary? And the first thing you should note here is there's no immediate response. There's a gap over half a second. And then B responds with, it's warm though, you know, isn't it dreary? Negative. It's warm though, positive. So B is not, you know, doing the preferred response. They're doing something different. And you can show that it's a dispreferred response because it's delayed. But you can also show it's a dispreferred response by what A is doing. Like A jumps in here to kind of reiterate or reformulate. You know, I don't think, so maybe changes what they were going to say. Okay, so here's this, again, the assessment about the weather. It's dreary. 0.6 second pause, which suggests there may be an upcoming dispreferred response. So preferred response is offered without delay. And then B's response is down here, and it's kind of an alternative assessment. It's not an exact agreement with what A is doing. Okay, now, have you got questions about that issue, like adjacency pairs and preference? So again, the idea is for each pair, you have a first action, and the second action, there's a preferred second action. So when somebody asks you a question, the preferred second action is you give an answer. And if you don't give an answer, you have to account for that in some way. What time is it? I said, what time is it? Huh? Oh, it's, you know, it's 11 o'clock. I didn't hear you. You know, you account for why you didn't do the dispreferred, or why you didn't do the preferred response. Okay, so I want you to try this together. So there are two excerpts on the handout. There's this one, I can't remember what number it is. I think number 3. And then there's these 4 examples. And the first one, I'm just asking you, label the action and the pairs. I think there are a couple adjacency pairs, line 1 and 2, and line 3, line 10 and 11, 12 and 14. So this excerpt comes from a classroom. Okay, and these other excerpts, A through D, are just regular conversation, and there are 4 different ones. So with these, look for actions and pairs, label what the actions are. And then for these, try to talk about how preference is working for those. And let's see. 10 minutes is going to be pretty fast, but I think that's all the time we have. So I'm going to call you back in 10 minutes. And if you don't get through it all, that's fine. Just take your time and work it out together. Okay, so we should all be assigned. Okay, there's an error in the transcript here. When you have a latch, like at the end of 11, there should be another one at the end of 10. There should be one at the beginning of 11 too, to show that there's no break there. Okay, so what actions 1 and 2 and 3? So I'm purporting that this makes up a pair here.
Sorry, that sounded like a statement. Yeah, we said that it was a pair. So we said that they were asking a question, and then we called the person in line 3 Molly. So Molly responded, but that she didn't give the preferred response. She just answered it with another question.
Yeah, that's right. It's not a preferred response. So there's a question, which way are you going to want to move the decimal, in this case, to put it back to a regular number. And then the second pair part is another question, which is not the expected response to a question. Okay, good. And then 10 and 11, 10, 11, 11, 12, and 14. What's this action in 10?
It seems to be a response to the question Molly asked in line 3, more or less.
Okay. A response to line 3. Why are you teaching us math? We use numbers. Yeah.
Sorry, we saw it as an assessment and then a disagreement.
We use numbers in science all the time. There's a kind of assessment aspect to it. I don't know what's the disagreement part?
No, we don't.
Oh, here in 11, yeah. So 11 is disagreement with 10.
Are there 2 units because Molly is a summons?
You could talk about it that way. I think that's important that Molly's is named directly, so we know exactly who this person Walsh is talking to. Whether I would call it 2 separate units, I'm not so sure, but it's important to talk about somebody's directly being addressed. I wouldn't call it a summons. Maybe if it was first Molly, like, hey, Molly, pay attention. We use number in science all the time, but Molly being addressed is important. Okay, and then what's going on with 12 and 14? This, if you don't recognize it yet, is supposed to be laughter tokens. Heh, 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 heh. It always looks so funny when it's written out, but it's supposed to be laughter.
Is Molly's response assessment 2 then?
Well, but what's 12 for, like, so you're saying Molly's responding to 12? Yeah. Then what's 12? What kind of action is 12? Especially if what you're saying in line 14 is an assessment, I think you can talk about 12 as some kind of an assessment too. I mean, 12 seems to be in response to what's going on up here, that this person, an unknown student probably, is laughing. So the student treats it as laughable. That's an assessment. And Molly responds with a rejection of that assessment. It's not funny. I'm not trying to be funny. So she kind of denies this assessment and makes her own assessment of the situation. And then Keith throws something and then Lonnie whistles. So this whistle thing is supposed to be like, because it goes, you know, it's a very long whistle. So that's what this was supposed to be. Good. So you have questions about that? Actions and responses to actions and pairs. This is not an easy one to analyze, so that was good.
So laughter can be taken as a turn?
Good question. Is it a turn? I wouldn't start there. That's a heavy theoretical issue that there's a lot of disagreement over. It's definitely assessment work, but you don't have to, whether you call it a turn or not, I don't know. So it happens in a sequence. We use numbers in science all the time, Molly. No, we don't. You know, so that's a response to that, or it's in reference to what's going on right there. And Molly clearly responds to that. It's not funny. Okay.
I guess I'm still just a little confused because if she responds to it, then it has to be a turn. And if it's in response to what she said, then it's a turn.
Well, like turn is a term that's usually referred to talk. You know, kind of like replacement for clause or sentence or something like that. So there are people who will say some sort of nonverbal behavior, some sort of gesture, you can count that as a turn, and other people say, no, it's not a turn because turn is just talk. So I'm just saying, if you want to call it a turn, I'm not going to argue with you. What's important is that there's a sequence of action here, and you say in line 12, this person laughs, produces laughter tokens. And then Molly responds to that. Okay, so what about the next one? Geez, how do I stop this? Anything to say about these? I would say they all look like assessments and agreements, positive assessments with agreements.
They all have the preferred response.
And they all have a preferred response. And
we were a little curious about B because it says, isn't it? And so we thought it was an assessment, but it's also like giving room for someone to respond by asking for, like, it's like when you ask a question that you can only accept one answer. Is like, hey,
Yeah.
This is my opinion. You agree, right?
Okay, so that's good. So this is, you can say this is a positive assessment that is projecting a yes response. So by putting this question tag at the end, this strongly prefers and projects a yes response. If you said, like, it's not a beautiful day, right? You know, that strongly projects a negative response. Right, it's not a beautiful day. So this is different than the others. Well, this is similar. That Pat, isn't she great? The best, really the best. I want to know Pat. I want Pat to be my friend. Okay, so we are at the end of class for today. If you have questions or comments and want to hang around, I'll be here. Otherwise, I'll see you on Wednesday.
Thank you.
Thanks. See you Wednesday.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
So John,
Mm-hmm.
what do you think about research on TESOL in Japan and language imperialism?
Oh, I'm glad I stuck around.
I wish I had time to read more about that. Sounds interesting.
I was thinking about doing that kind of research for my application.
Okay.
Do you think that's too broad?
Well, it sounds a little broad, but you know, maybe you could think about a particular context where you would see evidence of this, or what, like if you were going to do an investigation, what you would, like where you would go looking for it.
Gotcha. Okay. Thank you.
Okay. That was well, where do you okay.